What would you like to be a teenager in the 1960s?
What was it like being a teenager back in the day in Lewisham?
Ooh, being a teenager in Brixton with my background.
Well, one thing I can assure you, the 1960s sexual revolution.
Welcome back to No Ordinary Life, where ordinary people like Gavin,
Okay.
Julie, Anne, Andy,
Push that back.
April,
Okay.
Susanna,
It's really funny.
Spencer, Sarah, and B
I'm just painting pictures.
talk about their extraordinary lives.
What would you like to be a teenager in the 1960s?
What was it like to be a teenager in New Zealand?
Macclesfield.
What was it like in the 60s, 50s?
What was it like being a teenager back in the day in Lewisham, London?
Well, one thing I can assure you, the 1960s sexual revolution didn't come to an olive.
Comments below.
Certainly in the first half of the 60s,
It was fun.
teenagers
Bunked school.
weren't really teenagers. They were still
Went on bus journeys. We'd get on a bus journey at one stop and take it all the way to the end so we could bunk lessons.
large children.
Or we would leave early, stand outside McDonald's in Lewisham.
Things became easier
I think people still do that now.
in the later 60s.
Just meet up with all the other boys' schools because I was in a girls' school at the time.
Pop music, I think, the Beatles, I think, had a huge effect on that.
What was it like to be a teenager in New Zealand?
What was it like in the 60s, 50s?
Back in my day, when I was growing up,
It was probably exciting.
New Zealand is a small country. It has a small population. So
Because after
the fear of crime isn't as high as say, the UK or the US.
the war in the 50s,
So I feel like we had a lot of freedom.
I think by the 60s,
We would be able to go to the mall or
teenagers were able to rebel.
go out to the cinema not whenever we wanted, but
There was the revolution of
a lot freer than maybe might be able to happen now.
pop music, from the Mersey Sound and the Beatles and people like that.
Being a teenager in Brixton with my background was unbelievable. You see,
There was lots of fashion, and we're talking about quite dramatic fashion with
being a teenager means that you start becoming an adolescent, right?
Mary Quant and mini skirts and hot pants.
And you start like sort of coming into your own.
I started working in a corner store when I was 11.
I was working in a few different places. I've been on the Duke of Edinburgh Award course.
So I had disposable income from the age of 11.
In doing so, I'd worked at a creche,
Also had responsibilities as well. I had to go to work.
an old people's home,
So after school, I'd go to work,
and teaching horse riding at the Royal Mews Buckingham Palace. So
which would go up until maybe 9 o'clock at night sometimes.
I'd had an opportunity to look into all of these different spheres of existence.
So the weekends, I'd go and spend that money on the cinema or take my siblings to the cinema,
And that was my social education, like completely ticked.
or would go to the mall or go to the centre of the city and kind of walk around.
Because I was working in these environments, I got to meet different people.
Later on,
So I'm at Hyde Park Corner taking kids around the Hyde Park up Rotten Row and stuff. And then I'm coming back down to Brixton with my ghetto blaster, my baseball cap, my wraparound shades, like, the next day sort of thing.
drive up and down the main road of the city centre,
It was a massive insight into two ways that, two lifestyles, people living at the Hilton
spending time.
and then man and man them living in wherever they can, you know what I mean? It was bleh.
Stay tuned.
Being a teenager was difficult.
When they were all in bed, I used to get dressed,
The police cars came and screeched around me.
sometimes in mother's clothes.
They came and I thought, God, the Sweeney, remember the Sweeney?
Particularly the areas in South Wales where we'd had the mines closed.
I was just like, what?
We go to the Hammersmith Palais dancing.
And I realised in that moment that every other person.
The conversation continues.
What was it like to be a teenager?
Being a teenager was difficult.
Well,
We lived in a small town.
I really enjoyed my teenage years.
It was a really quite poverty-stricken area
I was at school till I was 15 and I worked
in the 1980s.
and earned money.
Generally, there was a recession everywhere. particularly the areas in South Wales where we'd had the mines closed.
While I was at school, we got up to the usual shenanigans of smoking in the coal shed.
It all really felt like the towns were dying. There was no ambition there. There was
Valerie Singleton, who you've probably heard of, was our head girl.
nothing exciting. There was not much for children to do or teenagers to do.
And she reported Joe and I for walking across Hyde Park without our hats on.
And it's very difficult to get out of the area and do anything exciting. So if we wanted to go to Swansea, say,
We were hauled up in front of the whole school and reprimanded.
to go and see a band, we'd have to get a lift or try and find the money for a taxi.
After I left school,
If you wanted to go anywhere, there was just probably no public transport on a Sunday or after 5 o'clock on a weekday even.
I went to live with my mother, can you believe it or not?
Yeah, it was quite difficult to have any kind of cultural life or meet other teenagers or people in general
And she lived just off Baker Street. She had a very small mews house off Baker Street, which I did like.
just find excitement. It was really hard.
When they were all in bed, I used to get dressed, sometimes in mother's clothes. We go to the Hammersmith Palais dancing, or in the West End. And creep-ho, I know the milkman caught me once and he said, I'm going to tell your mother about you.
Tell us your story.
Being a teenager in Macclesfield,
When we were younger than that,
it was quite good fun, really.
we'd just sort of gang up and go to the park and drink cider or hang around the streets.
I remember at the age of 13,
We'd tell our parents we were sleeping in somebody else's house and we'd just wander around all night.
we'd be playing football on the school field.
Or camp in the woods, and take some music,
Yeah, it was quite fun.
have fun.
I remember going magic mushroom picking at the age of 13.
Yeah, mostly drinking. I think glue sniffing was the only thing to do when we were very young teenagers.
I remember us making a brew up at our house.
But then when we got to about 15, my mum's boyfriend
There was about 12 of us, and we all suddenly came up on these things that we'd never taken before.
was a musician from Swansea, so he'd give us lifts into Swansea. So we go to the coach house and watch bands,
And then bumped into my friend's dad.
have a couple of drinks and just see some life.
None of us could speak, and we were all just laughing our heads off and had to run away.
Even though it was about 5 miles down the road, Swansea was like a different world. It was fantastic and we loved that.
Tell a friend to tell a friend, because I'm telling you, you need to like and subscribe.
Really hard because I don't have a teenaging time. I think I have a little bit.
I think
Approaching this subject now, I think it was quite interesting.
all teenagers are bound to be rebellious to a certain extent.
Because I was pregnant before.
When I was 15 and I was coming back from the Royal Mews Buckingham Palace after teaching for the RDA.
And I think it's really wild. Really like saying properly, then saying it's here.
I can't
The police cars came and screeched around me. I was going past the Imperial War Museum.
believe, though, in those days that
They came and I thought, God, the Sweeney, remember the Sweeney?
we still had a lot of respect for parents.
For me, because I don't have my mum and dad,
I thought, oh God, it's like the Sweeney.
I should be on my own and I just do my thing.
And these plainclothes cops came out and they
A lot of respect for teachers.
It's really just wild, just all do what I want.
came up to me and goes, where are you coming from? I'm like,
It did mean that we still had respect
Buckhouse.
to do what we were told.
And he slapped me in the face. And he called me all sorts of derogatory names. And I just looked at him.
But I think it was
And I was like,
swinging 60s weren't exactly
I was just like, what?
as swinging as all that.
And he goes, open the bag. And I had an Adidas sports bag. Remember the Adidas sports bag? Yeah, I had one of them, right?
I think there was still an awful lot of
And I opened it.
problems that people
When I opened it, the waft of I had my riding hat, my joppers, my crop, my riding boots, and the waft of horse came out.
encountered.
And I also had my little Duke of Edinburgh laminate pass.
Women still had a very raw deal
Said, Royal Mews Buckingham Palace, Duke of Edinburgh.
compared to their male counterparts,
And it was, oh, sorry, sir, we apologise. And I realised at that moment,
which I came up against quite a lot.
my adolescence, my childhood had sort of finished.
So there were
I realised that the only way that my basic civil rights will be respected
a lot of injustices,
is if I was some way affiliated with the royal household.
not particularly to do with teenagers,
And I realised in that moment that every other person that I knew
but just with the way of life in those days.
was going to be in that position at some time.
Next time.
How do I manage my health? Being healthy, fit and healthy is one of the most important things to me.
Badly.
I'm going to share this with you.
And I realise it's a roulette, isn't it?
I think my veganism did help my health,
You could be struck down with something at any time.
but my drinking didn't.
Doctor tells me that I've got prostate cancer. I'm like, oh.
No Ordinary Life. Thank you for watching.
What does family mean to me? Continuity and challenge, and great sense of satisfaction.
Subscribe to keep the conversation going, and don't forget to ring the bell.